It's time for episode 117 of The Crisis Show, and also episode 2 on the FIR for Immediate Release Podcast Network. Good afternoon. My name is Rich Klein. I'm president of Rich Klein Crisis Management and founder and host of The Crisis Show. Today, we're going to talk about live streaming and crisis management because live streaming has changed the way we communicate. It's changed the way the media is communicating, and it's impacted the way companies respond to crisis situations. So I'm so glad to have somebody who is probably one of the most knowledgeable people in the world on this subject. She's somebody who is an early pioneer in writing about social media. She's an expert on so many social media issues. She's a worldwide speaker on digital media and digital marketing from the UK and Ireland and Europe. Krishna Day. How are you, Krishna?
Delighted to be able to be here on such a relevant topic these days.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Nice to see you. Let me just put you up here. So for our viewers' benefit, Krishna, I wanted to start off the show with kind of a chronology on live streaming. And I guess it's about 2 years old now, right? Since it's sort of inception on mobile devices, I think you once said. So maybe you can walk us through a little bit about live video, live streaming, and maybe where you think it might be headed in 2017 and beyond.
Well, you're an early pioneer of live video, Rich, because this show's been going quite a number of years now, and it's brilliant to see it consistently there. And you're using live video yourself to actually stream this and then record it, which is actually Google Hangouts on Air. If we go back a little way before that, however, we've been watching live content for a long time. It hadn't always been possible for us to create it until we saw the options of actually platforms such as Livestream come along, or Ustream, or some of you might remember a platform called Qik, QIK. That was one of the first platforms I used to stream from my old Nokia phone, which shows you how long ago that was. And that was about 2008. And as you mentioned, really mobile live streaming has come into the fore, which I think is where we need to be talking about today for the crisis management show, particularly because that's anybody can have their mobile phone and could be streaming today. And that really came about because of a few things. We've got smartphones now that have got amazing capability. We've got data plans and Wi-Fi connections, even if you haven't got unlimited data, that actually makes it more possible. And then we laid on top of that technology. So technology, some of you might remember, is platforms like Meerkat came along. It was video content, and also they brought in some other options to be able to bring people on screen as well, only for a short burst of time. But that was back in 2015. And then along came Twitter purchasing Periscope.
Right.
Periscope is an app that's been very widely used. I was actually on it on the first day it started, which I think from memory was the 23rd of June, so 23rd of March, I should say, of 2015.
Yep.
And then we saw other platforms come along. So we've always been able to do live video off many different platforms for the last 8 years or so, but it's actually when things like YouTube allows us to live stream and Google Hangouts on Air allows us to live stream. That's several years old now, but the advent of mobile live streaming really shifted the game. We then later on in 2015 saw, of course, platforms like Facebook open it up in terms of for people to be able to use Facebook Live if they were initially a celebrity or a verified page, and then that's now been rolled out globally. But we've also now started to see that LinkedIn is testing out live video. We're seeing sites of Instagram testing out live video. And there are a multitude of other apps. So if you just go and search for live video in the App Store on Android or iOS, you're going to find a multitude of apps. And of course, some of those are going to be more likely to be used by creators and maybe a more youthful generation. So you've got Musical.ly, where you're actually able to use music and stream over the top of that. Or you've got Busker, where people are actually even earning revenue from the content that they're sharing, so people can actually pay them. So we're seeing a huge number. Interestingly, really strong in Asia. So if any of your viewers are actually watching or listening from there, they probably are aware of whole lot of others, and some of those are actually now coming over to North America and over into Europe as well. But if you talk about the big platforms, then you're really talking about YouTube. We're all still waiting, though, for us to be able to easily live stream starting from mobile. You can do it with third-party tools, and
Right.
it's been released to people. A certain group of people have got access to that at the minute. But then outside of that, then, of course, Twitter owns Periscope, and actually in this year, in September, formally launched Twitter live streaming, although we did see it in action back in June for Wimbledon. And then, of course, you've got Facebook, which has really taken the world by storm, to the extent now they definitely want people to know about Facebook Live, because about a week ago they started to advertise in the UK and in the US with billboards, with bus wraps and all sorts of other things to actually bring Facebook Live to the masses. So if you haven't heard about it before, you are definitely going to see this in action.
Yeah, Christian, I wonder, do you have a favorite of these live streams? And by the way, I was thrilled to see you have the first Periscope broadcast the day it was released. I was watching it. I think I commented, so that was great to see you at the forefront as usual. But do you have a favorite? And maybe you could. Let's look for a moment at least, because some of our viewers haven't used this technology. So let's start at the top. Just to go back to what you just said, Facebook, Twitter Live, I guess would be, and Periscope. Periscope. So like those two or three. Tell us quickly, if you can, some of the differences in the technologies, strengths and weaknesses of each, and which ones are companies using these days, if any.
Yeah, well, in fact, all of them. And we shouldn't forget YouTube, because it will not be long before YouTube Live, and of course Hangouts on Air, which you're using as well, becomes available for mobile. So, I'm hoping that comes very soon. But there are ways around it with third-party, even free tools that you could use today. It's always back to it depends. It depends, Rich, what your objective is. So if we're talking now, let's say, to communications and PR professionals, then there'll be certain platforms that they might want to use for different objectives. And for example, if we're talking to communications people and crisis communications people, then their organizations probably already have in place, in many cases, not all, but they may already have platforms such as Twitter for their organization. And many have multiple platforms on Twitter, or Facebook, in terms of having that as a platform. So those are platforms to consider where you're already reaching an audience. So a lot of reasons I think people have been so driven to actually look at Facebook Live is that they're able to reconnect now with perhaps audiences that they've grown, but it's been very difficult to get people engaged in your content, for example, within Facebook in particular. And Facebook have made some recognition of live video on their newsfeed, so it gives you notifications. So I'm seeing more organizations start to explore Facebook Live now because of the fact they're able to reach a population. Plus, after a live event, because not everybody will watch it live, a huge number of people will watch it afterwards. On Facebook, you can be very, very specific about how you want to retarget it and actually boost the video views of your live stream by paid advertising afterwards. Twitter is much the same in terms of...
Can I interrupt you 1 second? I just want to take them one at a time, because this was all great stuff about Facebook, and I just want to share very quickly my own experience with Facebook Live, Krishna. And I have a question too before you get to the next one, and that is, I have used Facebook Live to complement my photography business. So, like if I'm on a site taking shots, the other day, for example, I was on the Hudson River and just a beautiful view, and I put up a snippet, and I was amazed that it was nothing spectacular, but I was amazed at how many people joined in. My question for you, Krishna, is, how is Facebook, because when you start one, it says we're building an audience for you. Do you know how they do that? And because I was like, all of a sudden I'm getting people, I guess alerts are going out to people's feeds. When tell me technologically, if you can, how that's working.
Okay, so there's slightly different things going on, because I think if I remember rightly, when I saw that live stream, you did it from your personal profile,
right,
rather than a business page.
Right.
So there's different things that happen for each. So on a personal profile, then of course I can get notifications. You and I are friends on Facebook, and therefore I can get a notification. So they're doing that. Also, the other thing that will happen is you actually can indicate your location. So when you do a Facebook live stream from your profile, remember, it's like everything else on Facebook. You can decide who sees it. So you can set your privacy settings to say, I just want this to my friends or my family or a list, or you want it to be public. And you can also choose to put the location there. So if you put the location there, it will actually populate into a map. And if you're on Facebook, particularly if you're on desktop, on the left-hand side of Facebook, you'll actually see there's a link there for Facebook Live, and it brings up a global map where you can see what's happening in real time. So if you actually want to be scared witless about the kind of things that people are sharing on Facebook, then go and have a look at that map. And providing you've obviously put the location in there. So that's what they're doing. They're building an audience about people that know you. So I would get a notification, and that might actually, you know, I can see notifications, so therefore then might drop in live. And then over and above that, what I actually might see is you on the map, and they're kind of telling me as a friend. On Facebook pages, it's slightly different, and really important for you to know if you're managing a page, because on pages, people can opt in to get a notification. They want to be a fan of your page, but actually you need to have a look both on your mobile app. You can look at it, but also on desktop. You can actually be very specific about the content you want from a page these days. So as an example, Facebook Live has become very popular, in particular with news organizations. And so for those news organizations I follow, I do want to get notifications when they're live. So what happens particularly on a page is that you can go there and you can say, I want all live notifications, or I want none, or I want an average amount. And I also can say, I want to see this page first in my newsfeed. So people have got a more granularity about how they connect to your Facebook page. So again, what happens with the Facebook Live then from a page is I might get a notification that news organization has gone live. The other thing I've started to see, I don't see it on desktop, and I haven't yet seen it on Android. It might be rolling out to you on Android in the US, but at the minute I haven't yet seen it on Android. But on iOS, what I'm also seeing now is a little thumbnail, a little tiny square of a live video. So it would say like CNN, and it has their brand there. And for like 5 seconds or so, I see a preview of that video, which is coming up. And it's not just on my newsfeed, it's like on any page I'm on my mobile phone. So I'm getting a video notification now on my mobile phone that somebody or some business I'm following, or some organization I'm following is actually live. And therefore that's going to draw me in. The other thing that's happened recently for Facebook pages is it's not out for everybody. Again, I don't have access to this yet, but for verified pages, they've also allowed us to actually say we're going live, but they've allowed us to schedule it. So you can actually now build an audience for your Facebook page in advance. Now, it's a little bit more technical. If people have got questions, they can come back and ask me because I've got resources about it. But that is rolling out to all of us who have Facebook pages, particularly if we're using third-party tools to bring lots of additional quality content into it. But as I say, that's a lot more technical. So yes, Facebook is really going to be putting that content of yours in front of the audience who want to see it, be it on your friends, or be it in terms of people who opted onto your page.
Okay, so thanks so much for that. That's great information, because I think we all know it is confusing very often. I mean, even before live streaming, how to use a business page versus a personal page, and what are the different features of each, and that keeps changing too. I mean, Facebook does adjust that as time goes on. Same thing with YouTube Live and Google Hangouts on Air. There's always something new to learn. So it's important to keep up. So I encourage everybody to read Krishna De's blog. And what is that web address, Krishna, that you post about this stuff?
Yeah, krishna.me, KRISHNA.me. And I'm constantly testing and writing around live video and social business.
Absolutely.
But to your question in terms of which is the right platform, that's why we see some organizations going there. But I know some of your viewers and some of the people that you work with perhaps are not consumer brands, and perhaps they haven't got as strong a presence on Facebook. So that's why you've got other platforms to look at. So YouTube is a great platform that you could use for live video, or Google Hangouts on Air. As I said, the challenge there is you can't do it just from your mobile device to start it as easily. You can do with third-party tools. There's many of those available, but don't discount YouTube, because of course what you get the benefit of YouTube is if you optimize it. There's a lot of really interesting things that are happening for YouTube at the minute. So you could optimize your content with the title of it, how you describe it, the tags. But one breaking news feature that came out available just a week ago is a thing called YouTube end screens. And end screens, you might have seen those people who are really great at YouTube, where at the end of the video, they actually have an opportunity to play another video, play a playlist, or even direct people to things. And this has been available only to a select number of people, rolling out since June of this year. But as of a week ago, this is now available. So for the last 5 to 20 seconds, you actually can optimize it. And that's one of the reasons that even if I did a Facebook live stream and I streamed to Facebook Live, I would consider repurposing it. So it might not be live on YouTube, but I'd repurpose it to YouTube, because number one, YouTube comes up in search results, which might be really important in the context of crisis. It gets absolutely optimized in terms of search. Notifications can go out to people. It can be embedded on your site, obviously, as can Facebook. But this implementation of end screens and YouTube cards, you know what you could do? Let's say, for example, a really practical thing from crisis management perspective. Let's say you did a live stream about some breaking news in your organization, and that you actually had, even if it was a video, but if you did a live video, you had it on YouTube, or you had a repurposed video on there. Let's say you want to bring people back to a hub of resources where they want to know what's going on. You could direct them. You could have an image that comes up with a call to action that actually will be seen on mobile devices and also on desktop. This is really important because so many more people are watching video on mobile now. And then, of course, you could actually promote that content through the YouTube network, but you could also promote it through lots of other places. But actually that video, you could make that video might be just a minute long. It might be 90 seconds long. But for that last 20 seconds, you could direct people to a playlist of more information about it. You could direct people to a link back onto your website, let's say where your hub is with your press release and other resources related to that. Let's say you have a product recall. You could bring people back to that, more of an FAQ. So, there's some really interesting things to do there. Yeah. Go into Periscope for a moment, really driven from mobile, although you can do very much more additional production content or values there, like multi-cameras, lower thirds, things like a TV news event, images coming in and so on. You have to do that. That's now released available. You can apply for that. That's called Periscope Producer. And then what we see is news organizations, sports organizations, as I mentioned, things like Wimbledon, as an example, are actually now using a different product from Twitter. So not Periscope, which is Twitter's, but Twitter live video. I'm going to see Twitter invest a lot in that in the year ahead. So lots of different options that are available. I know many of people who are watching you may have had things like their press releases, they've done a press announcement, and they've done maybe a product launch, and they might have been using tools like Ustream and Livestream. I think one of the key things, though, that we've touched on mobile, I think the other thing before I pause for a moment is actually the whole piece around live video today, Rich, is about access, and access to things in real time, but access to people and commenting. And that's one of the big expectations that people have now of these kinds of forms of live video, be it Periscope, be it Facebook Live, less so really with YouTube, although you can enable commenting there too. But people have an expectation, like with social, somebody shares a message, and then there's an opportunity to interact, to ask a question, to actually put your question there in real time and have that picked up and actually influences the content of that live video. So yes, you could use it, and I've seen things like Periscope used for a launch of a new product, but those that have been most successful have been the ones where they've actually asked questions, the audience has asked questions, and they've been responded to in real time.
Yeah, that's a great point to make, because it brings me to the next thing I wanted to talk about, actually, which is, what a company does when a crisis hits, and how the media is also responding to live streaming. So one example, and you touched on it, I want to just go into it a little bit deeper, Krishna, is if you have a crisis, a major crisis, a serious incident in which you have to hold a news conference in let's say one city or one town, but you want to inform a larger community around the state or around a region, around the world. If it's something like an airline crash or something, an international incident like terrorism, for example, and you want to be able to reach large numbers of people. What you just said about the commenting is interesting, I guess, because you can have a news conference, and I think a lot of people are starting to use live streaming to do that, to reach more of an audience. And just for a quick interruption here, I'm a former print journalist, from 35 years ago, showing my age. And I'm also a public relations practitioner before I got into crisis management. And, one of the things that we did, Krishna, back in the day was we would, if we were holding a news conference, and now I'm not talking about a crisis event, but holding a news conference to advocate a point of view or to make an announcement, we would make sure that we would start setting up a room for that news conference. But it was always a small room, because you never wanted to have a room, use a large room for a news conference and no one shows up, or only 2 or 3 reporters show up, because it looks bad. It looks like no one attended your news conference. But that's all changed now with live streaming, because everything's like this, kind of head and shoulders. It's tight, tight shots. And you could have a CEO, for instance, and making an announcement, talking about a crisis situation. And as you said, from a crisis management standpoint, I think what people fear, Krishna, is the idea of being seen for such a long time on camera. And as you said, for situations where there's a crisis, where we used to, in my business, I would advise the CEO to record a reaction statement, a statement of, depending on the crisis situation, some kind of statement for the media and for the public. I would say record a video and upload it to YouTube. But now the difference, of course, is they can do that in live stream and get that out there as it's happening or right after it's happening. And that certainly would have helped people, and it would have helped the people and some of these crisis situations that we've seen, like the Exxon Valdez situation, like Tylenol, some of these major case studies in crisis management over the years. Live streaming would have been very interesting to see how it worked in the 80s when I got started in this business. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And so the commenting part is interesting. People could ask questions. The other thing I want to touch on with you, Krishna, and ask about is you mentioned to me in one of our conversations over the last few weeks about your conversations with journalists and how they're now being asked to use live streaming to complement their reporting. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're hearing and seeing in that space? How are journalists using live streaming? What are they being asked to do by their companies?
Yeah, I think I was referring to the fact that I was speaking at a conference and I was leading a session on live video. And some of the people who were there alongside me was a representative from Twitter, for obvious reasons, because of their live video interests. Somebody from the BBC, somebody from ABC News in Australia. But what we're seeing with journalists in particular is that they're being required now, sometimes for cost reasons, sometimes for access reasons, to be able to actually create content with their mobile devices. And it's called Mojo, mobile journalism. And included in that is live video as well. So, for example, if I go onto Periscope every single day, and this happens to be being streamed from the BBC outside stores offices in terms of their physical offices, but they actually live stream even their radio show, which is quite interesting. Yeah. So we're seeing things happening.
Yeah, they do it. I've seen that a lot. Right.
Yeah, we also see journalists going, and let's say, for example, there was an example of something that was going on in Spain recently. It was a dreadful incident that was being reported on, but a journalist was actually reporting from the scene every single day, giving people a live briefing, and actually then also doing it live. And it was also on TV as well, but actually they were reporting from their mobile device in terms of when the police were doing a briefing about what was going on at that particular situation. Or I've seen it, and I'm sure you've seen it too, for political events as well. Yes. So that being live streamed. So yes, you're absolutely right in terms of we're seeing a lot more news organizations and publications doing daily live streams. Sometimes they're planned as part of their usual rollout of news, and sometimes they might be just in the moment, let's say in terms of what's happening. Interestingly, when you do talk to journalists about some of what they see as the benefits of it, and actually I can see it as a consumer of their content, is that by actually giving us a little bit of a taste, a little bit of a, let's say, what's going on behind the scenes, it actually is driving more people to go back and actually watch the content, through whatever hub you get your news, or read. Increasingly, they've got lots of articles to support the news stories as well. And if for a big news story, they'll have like a microsite or a hub all around that content. So, but live video is not really eating their lunch. It actually can be driving more people to watch it. And absolutely, journalism is changing in their format. But the other thing I picked up from some journalists who are using mobile video, and it could be live or recorded, sometimes they can get really close into the action. And therefore, they don't have all of these big cameras and so on. So yes, there are things you can do to improve the quality of your video transmission. So even you were mentioning, Rich, let's say there was a press release. So even you decided to live stream that press conference that was going out. You don't have to be right in front of somebody's face. You can be a little bit further back. But there's tools you can use to zoom in. There's tools you can use to enhance your lighting. There's tools you can use to actually enhance the audio. And that's what these guys are using. So because we're so used to seeing people walking around the streets with a phone these days, you don't know if they're listening to something, if they're Snapchatting, if they're doing Facebook Live, if they're on Skype, or in fact, they could be live streaming. It allowed some of those reporters to get closer into the action than perhaps they were just seen like the regular public, and therefore they could actually have a different level of reporting that they could do versus actually being there with all the things around them. Now, clearly, when they're in that situation, they need to be careful for their own safety. So they shouldn't really be doing that themselves. They should have somebody with them, because particularly if it's a riot or a disaster, could be a natural disaster. So, the person there from ABC News in Australia was talking about how they were doing live video from the disaster that was happening in Nepal and some of the challenges that brings, including access to power. So they need to, this double thing, like I need to have power to do it, but all around me, all these people don't have power either. So it's actually really challenging in terms of some of the ethics of what you stream. And we're seeing live streams of war now on platforms, which not everybody likes. And we're seeing live streaming of not just natural disasters, but awful other disasters too. There's a whole ethics conversation, but people are able to get closer to the action almost because of having a mobile device than perhaps they might have done before.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on that. That's a great transition for what I want to talk about, which is you talk about people being in the middle of the action, and it leads us to what we haven't talked about yet, which I think is a really important component of the show today, is citizen journalism. The way that live streaming has changed changed many things. First of all, it's keeping a focus on government. It's keeping a focus, we've seen a lot of this here in the States, on police activity. When there are protests, when there are police-involved shootings, people are actually recording these things, which are horrible to watch, but they're being used to document things that happen, whether it's a protest on an oil pipeline or a police activity. And what's happening also, Krisha, and then I know you mentioned you watch CNN a lot over there in Europe. What's interesting to me is how the major cable networks, for example, are now very easily and comfortably integrating these live streaming feeds or streams that were just recorded a few minutes ago, or maybe even a half hour at most. But these things are happening very quickly, and they're giving the credit to the citizen journalists who are bringing in video. So whether it's an accident, a natural disaster, a crime, a political event, these things are happening. And what's very interesting, you talk about ethics, and I'm sure there are a lot of discussions going on in newsrooms around the world about how do we source this? How do we fact check this? How do we decide whether or not this is appropriate for our viewers to use? And of course, with all the technology, you have to also be careful that what's coming into your newsroom is legitimate a legitimate stream if it wasn't doctored or photoshopped or whatever, or mixed together. But people are, we all are watching this stuff, and the separation between what we used to consider, hey, this is coming from this reporter or this news network, and now the citizen journalist becoming part of the news story. So this is something I want to talk about a little bit, because if you're the owner of a business and somebody is trying to shine a light in the back room of your, let's say your boardroom, or the back room of your restaurant, for example, this is a new world we live in. And we saw this initially on social media channels like Twitter and Facebook, where disgruntled employees would take pictures of things that they didn't think were right, or they were doing horrible things to food, and then they were posting it. And then a fast food restaurant, for instance, would have a major crisis on its hands. So this is just a really interesting component of it. It's that double-edged sword of live streaming, in my view. It's great to have as a tool for marketers, for companies, for PR people, to help spread the message, as particularly when the media isn't listening to you in a crisis or not in a crisis. So whatever you're promoting, it's a very interesting thing that's going on. So it's a great tool to have, but it also could be your nemesis if it's being used to hurt your company and the reputation. So what I suggest to clients and prospects when we talk about this is you have to go to the social media channels where your audiences are. So if they're getting their news or their information about your company from a live stream or a Facebook Live, then you have to fight back on that channel. So I wonder what you thought about that, if that's something that you talk about with people that you touch in your world.
Gosh, this is such a huge subject. I think
I know I got off a little bit.
Let me just pick up a couple of threads of what you said.
Sure.
I remember the I remember that food organization, that fast service restaurant chain in the US. I won't mention who it is, but they did end up with a crisis. And in that particular case, it wasn't teens, it was 31-year-olds who were recording video content, posting it up onto YouTube. And that actually was disregarded. It was obviously a number of years ago now, probably about 8 years ago since it happened. It was disregarded by the organization. And I think the other piece that then happened is that organization Fair Play did respond on video. But in terms of actually response, I think a really important thing to do is make sure the right people are equipped with media skills, which I know something you do. And obviously I talk to people about live video and being comfortable in front of the camera. It doesn't always have to be the CEO. Sometimes it's better to have other people ready to be able to respond as well. But in that particular case, I'll never forget it, that whilst that organization responded with a video, they were actually criticized because it looked like it wasn't real, because it looked like it was being read from an auto cue. So I think that's another thing that people are expecting now, is that it will not be scripted, that actually there's some human emotion that comes in it. So I think that's probably a challenge that people are facing. But to your point about anybody can have shine a light on it, I just want to show you this, Rich, which is, this happens to be a camera. It is a 360-degree camera. This happens to be called an Insta360.
What's it called?
Insta, I-N-S-T-A, Insta360.
Thank you.
But it's tiny. It's just on top of my phone.
Right.
Now that's available for iPhones now. It's available coming soon for Android. But actually, with a press of a button, I can use a remote, or actually with my finger, I could actually take a picture. I could take a still picture, or I could even live stream video. So the reality is that's not going to be too far away for people using. So people might say, oh, well, you're only just giving one side of the picture. We actually can see the whole side of the picture. We can see right up here and right down here as well, and around every side. That's available now for people to be used. Now, I would anticipate that that kind of technology is not going to be far off being built into phones in the future, that we won't have to have separate cameras. This is one of the smallest ones I've seen. You can see it just clips onto it's very small, clips onto your phone. That's one of the smallest ones I've seen for 360. And so, yes, we have to be ready that anybody could be sharing content. Of course, there are rights and responsibilities. There's rights about, do you have somebody's permission to be on video? When I come into this live stream with you, YouTube actually reminds me, and Google Hangouts reminds me that my face and my image is going to be broadcast, and I have to sign up to that. That doesn't happen with every app. But you have to get people's permission to be broadcast. You typically have to make sure you're being responsible in terms of the images and the video content that you're sharing. You have to make sure you've got permission to be streaming from that location. But to be honest, when there's a crisis on, all of that will go out the window, and people won't even care because it's out there and the video is out there. So you need to make sure that your people are vigilant. I'm an ex-SVP of HR, and there's never been a bigger time, I think, than now, that it's about building that trust in your organization, because we cannot, as individuals, or even your marketing team, or even the comms team, do not have the resources to watch for everything that's out there. And one of the biggest challenge I'm finding at the minute from a reputation management perspective is that on video content, we're not actually seeing a transcript. So therefore, there's videos that are being shared that you might be being mentioned as an individual or as an organization, but actually, unlike a blog post, which can get picked up and can be found very easily because a company has been named or an individual has been named, and there's lots of social media monitoring tools, those tools don't yet fully exist for video. Let me give you a real life example.
Can I ask you a question on that, just to real quick?
Yeah.
Because my understanding, at least for my usage, and I'm not as experienced as you, but I have found that when I've done a YouTube video on almost anything, I've done some for clients, whether it's writing the concept, but also recording it, that actually has, YouTube at least, is very searchable because it's Google, and does very often get some great results, even over some of the text. Is that true?
Yes, so absolutely. If you optimize it,
Yeah.
so you optimize the video file, you optimize the tags and so on. But let's take an example. Let's take YouTube for an example. There could be a conversation that goes on around, let's pick a topic. Anything. I mean, just name a topic that's current at the minute for you, Rich.
The Chicago Cubs.
Okay.
World
Yeah, so somebody might put that as a title, the Chicago Cubs. But actually, in that video, they might talk about another player of another team, and they might even be disparaging about them. That's a good point. Doesn't come up unless somebody specifically on YouTube is doing something to make sure that they do want the transcript to become available. It's easier on YouTube to some extent because of their captioning.
Right.
But actually, organizations wouldn't know that. Let me give you a real life example for me on Facebook Live. I happen to follow somebody who does Facebook Lives off their profile. She's somebody who I know professionally, and she did a little video, and I try and catch up and keep up with their content. I'm usually watching it in replay mode. So the title of her that she'd put out there on her little Facebook Live that she was doing for us, a day, she was talking about a few things. I didn't know that she actually was going to mention me personally in that video. And when she mentioned me in that video, the only reason I knew about it is either somebody else watches it and mentions it and let me know, or I watch it. Now, as it happens, that wasn't a crisis, but it was an incorrect statement. So she was saying I had said X, where in fact, it wasn't that I said, it was Y. In fact, it should have been A and Z because It was very far apart. So, and that you might say, well, that's not important. Well, it is important for my reputation because she was talking about something that I do for my business. And therefore, if that information had gone out there and then somebody else watches it who knows that actually that is not correct, my reputation in that moment could be disregarded. And therefore, I don't know who's going to watch her video over time.
Right.
And therefore, what I did is I went back and I just left a comment. I said, thank you so much for actually commenting or mentioning me. By the way, what you were referring to was this, and I could give a link to it, rather than this, where I haven't seen it happen. So she was effectively linking me with a situation that was not true. I said, in the scheme of things, does that matter? Probably not. But that's just a little example of, I wouldn't have known that because there was no text around it. There was nothing to help me actually identify that. Of course, that's always the problem if there's private content. This is public content. And so I think back to me and my comment about culture of an organization, there's never been a more important time to really actually build that trust with your own people because they can be your eyes and ears. And also those people may actually just be associates. I mean, for example, you probably love some particular brands, Rich. There are some brands that I have strong advocacy for, or I have strong affinity for. I may not be an advocate. I might have a lot of affinity.
There's many more than I hate, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. On the other side, yeah. But
Yeah.
in those cases where we actually have an affinity,
Right.
I've actually found myself actually sending a private message to an organization and said, just be aware there's a conversation about you going on here in this video.
Right.
And that they may not feel appropriate to respond to, but at least be aware of, and be aware of how many people are watching it. A lot of these things, there are very transparent metrics about how many people are able to watch it, how many times it's being shared, because we don't have an early warning system like you do for other things. You don't have an early warning system for content that's been shared on a live video. So for me, there's never been a more important time to actually build up that listening with real people who can actually tell you and give you a heads up. And to your point around all of that other social content being shown, let's connect with somebody on Skype and we're going to bring them in from wherever because they're on the disaster. Or here's a piece of content that somebody just shared on Facebook Live around this piece of content that's been, really, really dangerous situation that people have found themselves in, whatever it might be. There are some organizations, there are some news organizations today who are being very judicious and scrupulous, and you'll see them and they'll ask for permission to embed and share. There are others which will just say, we'll do it and we'll deal with it afterwards. On the other side of that, there is a whole enterprise. I think we've talked about it on your show before. There's a whole enterprise series of organizations that have been set up to validate, to verify that's accurate. Because not all the time is content real. I'll give you an example from a week ago, again, actually on Facebook in the US. There were 3 big, huge viral Facebook pages which were streaming out content meant to be coming from live video from outer space. And actually, it was interesting because I went and had a look at this content. I could see people who are social media experts in the US, thought leaders. No, they're thought leaders. They're some of the biggest names in the industry, commenting, liking, or sharing that content. Guess what? All 3 examples were fake. Because what's happening now, this technology you can use that's available for free or for paid, that you can take content and you can restream it. And in fact, the BBC covered this, Mashable covered this as a story to say, these are fake live streams, and NASA wasn't streaming. So these 3 organizations, clearly they're viral pages, they want more views of their content. So they were taking previously recorded content from, in some cases, years ago, from outer space, and actually restreaming it on Facebook. So you have to be careful. And you're right, news organizations have to be careful about whether they actually say this has been verified or this is what we're seeing at the minute. As you said, people might say this has not yet been verified, and therefore they're putting a disclaimer around it. Yeah. But it's becoming more challenging. I think the key thing, though, as an organization is be aware that people can turn up with, their phone. I mean, journalists turn up with their phones and record things in real time. They'll record from the press statement. As well as I do, there have been lots of situations where politicians have walked out of rooms, thought the cameras were off, and maybe actually the audio has been rolling. Well, the live stream now can keep rolling, and you can get yourself into hot water.
And one of the most memorable examples of that, Krishna, was the 2012 presidential election with Mitt Romney, and I was actually an employee. It wasn't the media. He was at a fundraiser, supposedly a private event. Somebody put their phone, camera phone down on a countertop and recorded Mitt Romney making a statement that wasn't so horrible, but the media, of course, made it into a horrible thing. And he said only 40% of certain kinds of people are going to vote for me. And that was the headline for the next weeks on end. And some people think it actually cost him the election. It was just very interesting, he
made a crisis himself, and therefore his team probably had to go and firefight. That wasn't anticipated in their plan, was it? To go do some firefighting around a statement.
Yeah, and so I want to wrap up the show with some tips on this, because just a couple of pointers about live streaming and crisis communications, because I think at its core, before we had live streaming, you still for many decades, crisis communications, the practice of crisis management was based on the idea that you had time to get your message out if you were hit hard in a crisis, either by the media or by your stakeholders. You had time, and certainly in my career, I've seen that. It was tomorrow's New York Times, tomorrow's Wall Street Journal, or the afternoon newspaper in your town. I've actually been a journalist on 2 afternoon newspapers. Something doesn't exist anymore much in the States. But you had time to catch your breath, get your messaging straight, and then send out a news release and get your story out. Now, that was also a double-edged sword. You had time before other people attacked you, but it was a very slow process to respond to a crisis. So again, I look at this stuff, Krishna, as a double-edged sword on both sides. It can be your friend or it could be your foe, this new technology. So live streaming aside, I would just say to my viewers out there, the first thing you have to do when thinking about preparing for a crisis of any kind, whether it's a natural, one that's not your fault or one that might be your fault or the fault of an employee, for instance, you have to have a crisis communications team. And that's really important. It's important to include certainly the top part of your company. Those people have to be involved. You don't want to just push a crisis communications team down to middle management. It has to have CEO buy-in, if CEO is the appropriate title, the president, board of directors, whatever the case may be. You have to have your legal counsel involved because there are things that they're going to catch that you may not. But you don't want the attorney or the CEO just to control the whole dialogue around a crisis. Everybody who has a seat at that table should have a voice in what they know and bring in their expertise. Krishna, you said you're a former VP of Human Resources. I've always advocated in my work that when you're forming a crisis communications team, that HR plays a vital role in having a seat at the table. It's very important because very often HR department is depending on the size of the company, and as you say, the culture, real important thing, the HR director or leader very often is the connection to the employees who are your ambassadors for your reputation. So I think that's really important too. So you have to have a crisis communications team. What's changed though with the live streaming, what makes it more challenging is you have to put more bodies on board to handle this thing called social media. So when you and I started out in early 2000s, mid 2000s, blogging about social media and participating in it, analyzing it, we saw jobs being created, social media director or social media manager, right? And very often it's been very young junior people. The ad would say something like, "Hey, if you know Facebook or Twitter, you can handle social media." And what I've seen, and I've gotten calls from prospects and clients where they got themselves in trouble because they hired a very junior person to control all their social media. And of course, as we know, that's not easy anyway, because now there's so many channels to pay attention to and have your ears to the ground for. So that's a big problem. So I've always said to C-suite kind of people, don't leave your social media monitoring, commenting to junior people, because it's, if they don't know how to, they may know the technology and they may know how to use Snapchat, for instance, but if they don't know how to communicate, and by the way, a crisis is going to hit your social media channel. I'll give you a really quick example, Krishna. There was something just a few weeks ago regarding Citibank, where they were sponsoring a controversial rock artist who has made some comments over the years that were considered, anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. And Citibank had sponsored just a piece of this, of selling tickets. And I actually posted something. I was questioning them. They were good. They responded to me right there. But again, they didn't know that was coming from me, and other people had a petition. So you never know where a crisis like that's going to happen. And they happen very fast today, as you know, because whether it's a petition or a protest or a live stream of people protesting outside your building or any of your offices, that's something you got to be ready for. You made a great point earlier, Christian, about media training. And thank you for that, about getting people ready for this. It doesn't have to be the CEO, although it should be when there's a very serious crisis situation, particularly now with the live streaming. You have to be prepared to speak candidly, authoritatively, and not speak, like you said, not be scripted, as you said. Very important to speak from the heart, particularly in most serious kinds of crisis situations. And if you're doing a statement, if we're talking about live streaming in a crisis, so let's say there's been some things that come to mind an Amtrak in the U.S., let's say a major railroad accident where people were killed or there are injuries, severe injuries, you can put out a statement using live stream. You could set it up as a press conference with the doctors from the hospitals, maybe. Depending on the locality, it could be a police chief, it could be a fire department, it could be a first responder, and then government officials. You could have them around a table in a room, and each of them taking a piece of it, talking about the incident. But in terms of content, you could just say very simply on that live stream, we want to give you some basic information about this incident that just happened an hour ago. We have this number of fatalities. We have these number of people being reported injured. And then you just tell people, we're still investigating it. We're cooperating with the investigation, whether it's the police or, NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board here in the States. I imagine in Europe there's similar agencies. And that you just show what you want to do is show camaraderie. You want to show that you're cooperating with the authorities to get control of the crisis, and that you're going to find out what happened. But you're not going to rush to judgment. You're not going to speculate. And you tell the media, whether it's in person or virtually through a live stream, that you will have another live stream, whether it's 3 hours later or the next day or a few days later, to give them updates. In the most serious crisis situations, though, you want to have multiple news conferences, whether it's on live stream and or in person, to keep the media and the public informed. Because very often what's happening, as you say, Krishna, conversations are going to happen no matter what, pro or con, about how you're handling the crisis. So the beauty of the live stream is you're going directly to the public. It's not, and particularly if you have a media outlet that has it out for your company or your government agency, this is a way to tell your whole story and get it directly to your critical audiences. So that's really important. So I wanted to just leave our audience with some of those crisis communications tips and integrate it with live stream, because we are in a new world. As again, it is a double-edged sword, this live streaming. It can definitely help you communicate to protect your reputation, which is what the show is about. But it also can hurt you if you don't respond fast because of citizen journalism and irresponsible reporting. So I want to leave at least on that point. And is there anything else that you want to comment on that I said or add before we leave, Krishna?
Yeah, there's a few things, 3 or 4 things I think that you've made me think about when you said that. Some really, really helpful tips. I think also, firstly, you said don't leave it to the people who've not got experience in the organization. At the same time, they perhaps have a different way that they know how to speak in a language that's relevant. So I think I wouldn't dismiss a younger audience to be able to do that. I'd say, but make sure there's a buffer there.
I don't want to have all the control, but you're right, yeah. Absolutely.
So make sure that they know where to flag it to when there is an issue. And some cases, particularly large organizations, or let's say financial institutions or utility organizations, they need 24/7 cover. That's and right. That in some cases is being outsourced. So it's about working hand in glove with those organizations too. So I don't think social media today, and live video comes in that, can be left to your marketing team. Exactly. As a communications organization, part of the organization, you've got to get a stronger relationship there with your marketing team, which is probably historically where social media communications has been, because it's been used for marketing and then latterly sales. Right. I think it's about a stronger relationship in the organization there. So I absolutely agree, though, you need to have some wisdom there. The other thing is manage expectations would be another thing I'd say. So as you mentioned, you could actually do that live video. I think sometimes people get nervous about leaving the comments open. And if you can I would encourage you to do that. But I also know sometimes people want to turn the comments off, like on Periscope, where you can turn it off. And that's because they're delivering a message. And I've seen this even, like, say, the police delivering a message at the scene of a disaster, and they don't want to have a barrage of questions that way. But I think if you manage the expectations of people to say, we're coming here with a briefing, we will be able to have more information to tell you at this time, just deliver against those expectations, because I think people will be much more understanding. They will understand why you might have turned the comments off in that particular situation. Yeah. But if you do leave the comments on, you cannot do this alone. Unless you're a micro business, You can't do this alone
I know.
because you need somebody on camera. You don't hold your phone or whatever device still. You need the person who's delivering. You need the person who's watching the comments, who can then either type back in real time to people who are commenting, or feed you the questions, the key questions, and the sentiments that's coming through. So I don't think that you have to always have comments open, because I think in a crisis there is good reason that you might turn them off. But to be aware that people will have an expectation. So if you don't allow them to actually comment there, they'll find another place to comment. So you just got to go find them. So I think that's just something to be aware of. And I think the other thing is, I'd also just, I guess, finish on, you and I are parents. You and I are parents.
Krishna, I just want to jump in before we get to the last segment. I just want to jump on something you said that and just add a thought for a moment. You talked about the comments, which is very interesting. I just want to, for our viewers' benefit, I've actually been asked by companies and organizations to create Facebook pages for their business, for their ad, for the issue, or for their crisis. And it's very interesting that you raise that. I have been tasked very often to monitor those comments and make decisions on behalf of an organization about if they are open, first of all, to respond to them. But sometimes you have to make a decision about deleting a comment if it's so over the top, or using foul language, or just totally crazy. And that's a very sometimes those decisions are difficult, and you will incur the wrath of some people if you've deleted a comment. But sometimes you have to, because it's so vile or so inappropriate and is totally off what the conversation is about. So those are tough decisions and I think companies should have some policies around that, even on all the social media channels in non-crisis situations, be able to say, okay, if this issue comes up about our product, then generally this is what we're going to talk about and drive the conversation to. Or very often what you'll see, Christian, as you know, is it'll say, let's take this conversation offline. Please email us or call us. Let's discuss your particular problem with our product or service. Because you don't want because that could actually blow up a crisis if you keep someone's individual complaint, gripe, or criticism. It keeps going on and on about a situation that wasn't handled properly. And the other thing I just want to add to that real quickly is, I have seen, and I still see it amazingly in 2016, that there will be a major crisis and the company will either ignore the crisis that's going on, or even worse, they'll continue marketing their product or service that's involved in a recall or involved in natural. They're still happy, or let's celebrate, or here's our latest promotion. And what I always say is, don't ever do it. If there's a crisis, it's all hands on deck, online and off, focusing on resolving that crisis to protect your reputation, and in many cases to rebuild your reputation, which could take a long time, very often, depending on the seriousness of the situation. So don't ever.
Well, great point there, Rich. I mean, I think if any of your
crisis,
I think if any of your clients are watching, they should come back and talk to you about, because if they don't have a policy, because I actually have guidelines, you can call them house rules or whatever. So I have those for all of my social networks.
Right.
So in fact, if you went to my main Facebook page, you'd actually find there a policy about, I've actually agreed that upfront, about under what circumstances I actually would delete comments. And you find that for some big brands, but you actually, I'm finding more and more organizations don't have their terms of reference. It's almost like your blog comment policy.
Yeah.
So that's one thing you can do. The other thing you can do is Facebook. If you're talking specifically about Facebook, behind the scenes, you can actually put watchwords there. So words that if people posted that, it gets held for review. So that content never gets published in the first place. So Crisis is a really good example of when you might want to go back and actually recheck those watchwords that are in there. To make sure they're not changed, you might need to enhance them. And the other thing you said was really good, and I've seen crises erupt around this. I mean, you and I talked at the time of, you remember that horse meat crisis that happened?
Yes.
You actually did a live stream about that.
3 or 4 years ago.
We'll find that on your YouTube channel.
Yeah, that was a fun show.
We did a live stream about that. And one of the things that happened in that case is, again, back to that whole piece on social media. A lot of social media has been automated now, and maybe it's even automated with an agency. And so in that particular case, I won't name the organization because it's not fair on them, but a very, very big retailer in Europe, in fact, they are international too, but this happened from actually within their UK operation and the Irish operation, if I remember rightly, that they actually posted something on Twitter because it was part of their kind of automated routine. And the day that the horse meat crisis erupted, and therefore certain products were taken off the shelves, this end of day message went out. So of course what had happened is that then everybody, including all the newspapers, did screenshots and embeds of that tweet that had gone out, which then they had another mini crisis to manage because of the fact that they hadn't turned off the automated content. So again, that comes back to that linking up between the comms team, who perhaps are going to be closer to the crisis, and maybe the HR team who are closer to the crisis, with the marketing team or the outsourced agency, where things have been actually pre-programmed to go out. But in fact, it's not in kilter. Or you've got a digital agency who's doing Google advertising for you, or you've got an ad that's rolling on TV or on radio. It's that joined up. We can't have silos anymore. We have to have that kind of joined up thinking.
Yeah. Well, I got to wrap up at this point because we've gone over an hour, but thank you so much. And I know what you want to talk about safety, but maybe we'll do another show on that about safety and social media for children. I think it's a good point. It's something
I just think the one thing I'd say is be aware, which is why I said go and have a look either at the Periscope live streams that are happening around the world or the Facebook live ones. There are some scary things that are being shared from children's bedrooms.
Absolutely.
And so I'd say if you've got a family member, a young family member, just make sure that you reminded them of what needs to happen in terms of their privacy. And it doesn't matter if it's on Snapchat or Instagram or Facebook Live or one of the multitude of apps that they've got that you've probably never heard of.
Yeah, and I would just
conversation over the dinner table at some stage, just to raise awareness. We may not always know how to use them. We may not know every single app that's on their phones these days. But I think it's just being aware that actually it's about, we don't want a crisis in our home either.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I would just say, as the father of a 16-year-old who's is much more technically proficient than I am. She teaches at a tech camp, so I go to her when I have problems. But I would also just add, just real quickly on that note, to encourage your children to come forward when they see things that are upsetting or things that they can't. Not ready to cope with, to come forward to. That's also a good tip as well. Have dialogue with them about things that are happening, but also how to be responsible on social media. I know that I've read about kids who get encouraged to do the sexting thing. They get in big trouble, and their reputations are just horrible stuff going on. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword. Again, the technology and the access to information is just so different. So it's important to keep a dialogue with our kids about that. So we should leave on that positive note, certainly. So for those of you watching, thank you so much. First of all, I want to just give you a little wrap up. We've talked about live streaming. Krishna's done a great job about explaining the chronology, and you can go to her website, which is she's got a few things. First of all, she's got 38,000 people on Twitter, which is amazing. Because when I met her, I don't know how many you have. You did have 38,000 people. So congratulations, you built a great following through your hard work over the years. And your website is Krishna.me, M-E, a lot of great information. Krishna is one of those people who gives away a lot of good information before you even hire her. But I encourage you to hire her wherever you are in the world when you have these kinds of digital issues. If you want to learn about live streaming and digital media, she gives away a lot on video and in her blogs and beyond. So check her out at Krishna.me. I just want to say also that we are now also on the For Immediate Release podcast network, and we're so thrilled. This is our second episode working with a friend of ours. Krishna has worked with him as well, Shell Holtz, who runs the FIR network. And I just found out last night that we are also now live on iTunes because we did our first episode under the FIR podcast network. And this is the web page here that Krishna has been part of at various times, and I am now part of it with the Crisis Show. We're thrilled to join with Shell, and just a great team of people. He always has great guests on all these various shows, as you can see here. So that website is firpodcastnetwork.com. So we'll be there as well as on YouTube with the Crisis Show going forward. Pretty much every 2 weeks is the plan. So we'll see how that goes. So again, wanted to just give you that little tip about FIR and that plug, because it's certainly good for all of us to share information. A lot of good experts around the world. So Krishna, thank you so much. As usual, this was wonderful. You and I go way back, and it's always a pleasure to talk and learn from you and share information. I always get smarter when I talk to you. So thank you.
Thank you. Delighted to have the opportunity to share